The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. This supernatural horror film marks the third installment in the main Conjuring series and takes the Warren investigations into even darker territory than before. The movie is an American production that comes from the horror powerhouse New Line Cinema, in association with Atomic Monster Productions and the Safran Company. The film was directed by Michael Chavez, who took over the directorial reins from James Wan. While Wan stepped back from directing this entry, he remained involved as a producer alongside Peter Safran. The screenplay was crafted by David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick, who previously worked on The Conjuring 2. This installment is particularly notable because it's inspired by the first United States murder trial where demonic possession was actually used as a legal defense. The case became known as the Devil Made Me Do It case, or the Arne Cheyenne Johnson trial, which took place in 1981 in Connecticut. The film continues to follow the real-life paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, portrayed once again by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, as they attempt to prove the innocence of a man accused of murder by demonstrating that he was under demonic influence. What sets this film apart from its predecessors is its shift in focus. While the first two Conjuring films primarily took place in haunted houses with the families experiencing the terror, this third entry moves the investigation beyond a single location. The Warrens must track down the source of the possession across multiple locations, turning the film into more of a detective story intertwined with supernatural horror elements. Plot details: the film opens with one of the most intense exorcism sequences in the entire Conjuring franchise. In 1981, Ed and Lorraine Warren travel to Brookfield, Connecticut, to assist the Glatzel family. Young David Glatzel has become possessed by a malevolent demonic entity, and the situation has reached a critical point. The family is desperate, and the Warrens, along with Father Gordon, attempt to perform an exorcism to save the boy. During this harrowing ritual, Arne Cheyenne Johnson, the boyfriend of David's older sister Debbie, is present. As the exorcism intensifies and David thrashes violently, Arne makes a fateful decision. Witnessing the unbearable torment that young David is enduring, Arne invites the demon to leave the boy and take him instead. In a selfless but ultimately catastrophic act, Arne offers himself as a vessel, believing he can handle whatever darkness inhabits David. The demon accepts this invitation. During the exorcism, Ed Warren suffers a severe heart attack brought on by the supernatural forces at work and the sheer intensity of the encounter. He survives, but the experience leaves him weakened and unable to continue his work immediately. Meanwhile, the exorcism appears successful as David is freed from the entity's grip, but unbeknownst to everyone except Lorraine, the demon has transferred into Arne. Several weeks pass. Arne and Debbie are trying to move forward with their lives, planning their future together. Arne has been experiencing strange blackouts and disturbing visions, but he attributes them to stress and the trauma of what happened to David. One day, while at work at a kennel, Arne's landlord Bruno Sauls gets into an argument with him. This confrontation triggers something dark within Arne. In a brutal and savage attack, while under the complete control of the demon, Arne stabs Bruno multiple times, killing him. When Arne regains consciousness, he finds himself covered in blood with no memory of what transpired. He's immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and he faces a long prison sentence or worse. Debbie contacts the Warrens, convinced that what happened to Arne is connected to David's possession. Despite Ed's still fragile health, he and Lorraine believe Arne's claims of possession. They decide to investigate, hoping to prove in court that Arne was not in control of his actions. However, they face enormous skepticism. The legal system has never recognized demonic possession as a valid defense, and many people, including the prosecution, view the Warrens' involvement as a publicity stunt. Lorraine uses her clairvoyant abilities to trace the source of the curse. Through her visions, she discovers that the demon that possessed David and then Arn didn't appear randomly. Someone deliberately summoned it. This revelation transforms their investigation from a simple case of possession into a hunt for a practitioner of dark magic who is using demonic forces to harm people. Their investigation leads them to discover a series of murders and mysterious deaths connected to a satanic curse. They uncover evidence of occult rituals, including a strange totem found beneath the Glatzel house that was used to channel the demon. As Lorraine delves deeper into her visions, she experiences the terrifying presence of a demon known as the Occultist, a powerful entity that serves as a conduit for the curse. The Warrens' research takes them to Kastner, a former priest who has been investigating occult activities in the area. He provides them with crucial information about a network of occultists, and points them toward the possibility that someone with knowledge of dark rituals is behind the attacks. The evidence suggests that the curse was specifically designed to target the Glatzels and anyone connected to them. As Lorraine continues to have visions, she sees a mysterious woman performing satanic rituals. The trail leads them to an isolated area where they discover an underground altar filled with occult artifacts and evidence of human sacrifices. They realize they're dealing with a practitioner who has been using these rituals to command demons to possess and destroy innocent people. The climax builds as Lorraine identifies the person responsible, Isla Kastner, the daughter of the former priest they consulted. Isla has been using her father's research into the occult to practice dark magic herself, motivated by twisted beliefs and a desire for power. She has been systematically cursing people, and the Glatzels were simply her latest victims. In the film's intense finale, Lorraine confronts Isla at her property, a place saturated with dark energy and surrounded by evidence of ritualistic murders. A terrifying battle ensues as Lorraine must face not only Isla, but also the demonic forces she commands. The occultist demon manifests in its full horrifying form, and Lorraine must use every ounce of her spiritual strength and faith to survive. Ed, despite his weakened condition, arrives to help Lorraine. Together they manage to break the curse by destroying the altar and the totems Isla used to maintain her control over the demons. In doing so, they free Arn from the demon's influence, though the damage has already been done in the physical world. The film concludes with Arnie's trial. While the judge rejects the demonic possession defense as legally inadmissible, the jury shows some sympathy given the circumstances and the Warrens' testimony about the supernatural elements. Arn is convicted of manslaughter rather than first-degree murder, and receives a reduced sentence. Debbie remains faithful to him, visiting him in prison and waiting for his release. The Warrens, having solved another case, add the evidence from this investigation to their occult museum, and Ed, though still recovering, is shown slowly regaining his strength with Lorraine by his side. Cast Patrick Wilson returns as Ed Warren, the demonologist and paranormal investigator who, along with his wife, has dedicated his life to helping people plagued by supernatural forces. Wilson brings a warmth and groundedness to the role, portraying Ed as both a man of faith and a devoted husband who will stop at nothing to protect the innocent. Vera Farmiga reprises her role as Lorraine Warren, the clairvoyant and Ed's wife and partner in their investigations. Farmiga delivers another powerful performance, showcasing Lorraine's gifts, her vulnerability when confronting dark forces, and her unwavering commitment to helping those in need. The chemistry between Wilson and Farmiga remains the emotional heart of the franchise. Rory O'Connor portrays Arn Cheyenne Johnson, the young man who becomes possessed after inviting the demon to leave David Glatzel and enter him instead. O'Connor effectively captures Arnie's transformation from a loving, selfless boyfriend to a man tormented by forces beyond his control and ultimately accused of murder. Sarah Catherine Hook plays Debbie Glatzel, Arnie's girlfriend and David's older sister. Debbie is portrayed as fiercely loyal and loving, standing by Arn even when the evidence seems overwhelming and never wavering in her belief that something supernatural caused his actions. Julian Hilliard appears as David Glatzel, the young boy who becomes possessed at the beginning of the film. Despite his young age, Hilliard delivers a disturbing and convincing performance during the possession scenes. John Noble plays Father Kastner, a former priest who has spent years researching occult activities and helps the Warrens understand the ritualistic nature of the curse they're investigating. Eugenie Bondurant portrays the occultist, the terrifying demonic entity that serves as one of the primary antagonists. Through makeup, effects, and physical performance, Bondurant creates one of the most unsettling demons in the Conjuring universe. Shannon Kook appears as Drew Thomas, Debbie's employer and a friend who becomes involved in the investigation and supports the couple during their ordeal. Ronnie Jean Blevins plays Bruno Sauls, Arnie's landlord whose confrontation with Arn triggers the possession-induced murder that sets the plot in motion. The supporting cast includes Keith Arthur Bolden as Sergeant Clay, Sterling Gerrans as Judy Warren, Ed and Lorraine's daughter who appears briefly, Vince Pisani as Father Gordon who assists with David's exorcism, and Andrea Andrade as Jessica Louise Strong, among others. Each actor contributes to building the authentic 1980s setting and the escalating sense of dread throughout the film. Release date: The Conjuring. The Devil Made Me Do It had a complex release strategy due to the global circumstances affecting the film industry. The film was originally scheduled for release in September 2020, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was delayed multiple times. The movie finally premiered on June 4, 2021, in the United States. Warner Bros. Pictures opted for a hybrid release strategy, making the film available simultaneously in theaters and on the HBO Max streaming platform. This dual-release approach was part of Warner Bros.' 2021 strategy to release their entire slate both theatrically and on streaming to accommodate audiences during the ongoing pandemic. The theatrical and HBO Max release ran for 31 days, after which the film became exclusively available through other distribution channels. Internationally, the release dates varied by country, with some territories receiving theatrical-only releases depending on local circumstances and HBO Max availability. Despite the unconventional release strategy and the challenges facing theatrical exhibition at the time, the film performed well commercially. It grossed over $206 million worldwide against a production budget of approximately $39 million, making it a financial success. The film opened at number 1 at the domestic box office and maintained strong performance in international markets. The film received mixed to positive reviews from critics. Many praised the performances of Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, the atmospheric direction by Michael Chavez, and the film's attempt to take the franchise in a new direction beyond the haunted house formula. However, some critics felt that the shift toward a more investigative storyline sacrificed some of the pure horror elements that made the first two films so effective. The possession and exorcism scenes, particularly the opening sequence, were widely praised for their intensity and horror craftsmanship. Trailer information: The marketing campaign for The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It built significant anticipation among horror fans and followers of the Conjuring Universe. The first official trailer was released by Warner Bros. Pictures in April 2021, giving audiences their first substantial look at the film after multiple delays. The trailer immediately established the film's based on a true story credentials, opening with title cards explaining the real case of Arn Cheyenne Johnson and emphasizing that this was the first time demonic possession was used as a murder defense in United States legal history. This real-world connection has always been a powerful marketing tool for the Conjuring films, and the trailer leaned heavily into the shocking nature of the actual events. The promotional footage showcased the intense exorcism scene that opens the film, with quick cuts of David Glatzel contorting unnaturally and the Warrens attempting to free him from the demon. The trailer highlighted the moment when Arn invites the demon to take him instead, a pivotal selfless act that sets the entire story in motion. The marketing materials emphasize the investigative nature of this installment, showing the Warrens tracking down clues, exploring sinister locations, and uncovering evidence of satanic rituals. Shots of occult totems, underground altars, and ritualistic symbols created an atmosphere of dread and suggested a larger conspiracy at work. The trailer also featured several jump scares and frightening images, including glimpses of the occultist demon and other supernatural manifestations. The waterbed scene, which became one of the film's most discussed sequences, was teased in the promotional materials, showing Arn being pulled under the undulating water in a terrifying moment of demonic attack. The musical score in the trailer built tension effectively, combining silence, atmospheric sounds, and sudden musical stings to create maximum impact. The tagline emphasized the unprecedented nature of the case and the Warrens' mission to prove the impossible in a court of law. Additional promotional content included behind-the-scenes featurettes with Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga discussing the real Warrens and the responsibility they feel in portraying these individuals. Director Michael Chavez appeared in interviews explaining his vision for taking the franchise in a new direction while maintaining the elements that fans loved about the previous films. Television spots, social media campaigns, and promotional partnerships with paranormal-themed content creators helped build awareness. The studio also capitalized on the franchise's existing fanbase by referencing connections to previous Conjuring Universe films and the larger mythology that has been established across multiple movies. The poster designs featured dark, foreboding imagery with the Warrens prominently displayed alongside taglines that emphasize the possession-defense angle and the based-on-truth nature of the story. The marketing successfully positioned the film as both a continuation of a beloved horror franchise and a fresh take that would expand the scope beyond traditional haunted house narratives. The Exorcism of David Glatzel. The story begins in July 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut. Ed and Lorraine Warren arrive at the Glatzel family home to help with a dire situation. 8-year-old David Glatzel has been experiencing terrifying supernatural occurrences that have escalated to full demonic possession. The family is at their breaking point, having witnessed David exhibit inhuman strength, speak in languages he doesn't know, and display knowledge of things he couldn't possibly know. Lorraine Warren, using her clairvoyant abilities, senses an extremely powerful and malevolent presence attached to the boy. The demon is ancient and filled with rage. Ed Warren, along with Father Gordon, prepares to perform an exorcism to free David from this entity's grip. Present during this ritual are David's mother Judy, his sister Debbie, and Debbie's boyfriend Arn Cheyenne Johnson. The exorcism sequence is brutal and harrowing. David levitates, his body contorts in impossible ways, and the demon speaks to him with a voice that is distinctly inhuman. The entity mocks the Warrens, threatens everyone present, and demonstrates its power by causing objects to fly around the room and creating an atmosphere of pure terror. Lorraine attempts to connect with David spiritually to give him strength, but the demon fights back viciously. During the most intense moment of the ritual, when David is suffering unbearably, Arn Johnson cannot stand to watch any longer. Overcome with love for Debbie and compassion for her young brother, Arn steps forward and directly addresses the demon. He invites the entity to leave David and take him instead, believing that as an adult, he can better withstand the possession than the terrified child. Arn essentially offers himself as a sacrifice to save David. The demon, seeing an opportunity, accepts this invitation immediately. In a shocking moment, the entity begins to transfer from David to Arn. Lorraine witnesses this transfer through her psychic abilities and is horrified, reaching out to stop it, but it happens too quickly. The demon leaves David's body, and the boy collapses, finally freed but completely exhausted. However, the spiritual battle takes a severe toll on Ed Warren. The exertion, combined with the demonic forces at work, causes Ed to suffer a massive heart attack. He collapses during the exorcism, and there is genuine fear that he might die. Lorraine is torn between her concern for her husband and her knowledge that Arn has now become the demon's new host. Ed is rushed to the hospital where he survives, but doctors warn that his heart has been severely damaged and he needs to rest and recover, staying away from the stress of paranormal investigations. Arnie's descent and the murder in the weeks following the exorcism, life appears to return to normal for the Glatzel family. David recovers and shows no signs of possession. Arn and Debbie, relieved that David is safe, begin planning their future together. Arn gets a job working at a dog kennel, and the couple rents a small apartment from a man named Bruno Sauls, who also owns the kennel where Arn works. However, Arn begins experiencing disturbing symptoms that he doesn't fully understand. He has terrible nightmares filled with dark imagery and violence. He suffers from blackouts where he loses time and cannot remember what happened. During these episodes, he sees horrifying visions of demonic figures and experiences an overwhelming rage that seems to come from somewhere outside himself. Arn attributes these experiences to stress and trauma from witnessing David's possession, never suspecting that the demon now resides within him. The demon lying dormant inside Arn is biding its time, growing stronger and waiting for the right moment to fully take control. It feeds on Arnie's emotions, particularly negative ones, and slowly begins to influence his thoughts and behavior without his conscious awareness. One day at the kennel, Bruno Sauls confronts Arn about a disagreement. The argument is relatively minor, perhaps about rent or work responsibilities, but it triggers something dark within Arn. The demon seizes this moment of anger and completely takes over Arnie's body and mind. Arnie's eyes change, his demeanor shifts entirely, and he is no longer in control of his own actions. In a frenzy of demonic violence, Arn attacks Bruno with a pocket knife. The attack is savage and relentless. Arn stabs Bruno multiple times, far more than would be necessary to kill someone, showing a level of brutality and rage that is completely inconsistent with Arnie's gentle personality. The attack is witnessed by no one, occurring in a relatively isolated area of the property. When the demonic influence finally recedes and Arn regains consciousness, he finds himself standing over Bruno's body, covered in blood, holding the murder weapon. He has absolutely no memory of what happened. The last thing he remembers is the beginning of the argument, and now Bruno is dead at his feet. Arn is horrified, confused, and completely unable to comprehend what has occurred. The police arrive shortly after, likely called by someone who heard the commotion or discovered the scene. Arn is immediately arrested. The evidence against him is overwhelming and undeniable. He is found at the scene covered in the victim's blood, holding the weapon, and his fingerprints are all over the knife. There are no other suspects, and no alternative explanation that makes sense from a conventional perspective. Arn is charged with first-degree murder and faces the possibility of a death sentence, or life in prison. The Warrens' investigation begins. Debbie Glatzel is devastated by Arnie's arrest but absolutely refuses to believe that the kind, gentle man she loves could commit such a horrific act of violence. She knows Arnie's character and is certain that something supernatural must have happened. She immediately contacts the Warrens, explaining the situation and begging them to help prove that Arn was possessed during the murder. Ed Warren is still recovering from his heart attack, and his doctors have strongly advised him against returning to the stressful work of paranormal investigation. Lorraine is torn between wanting to help Arn and protecting her husband's health. However, both Warrens believe in Arnie's innocence on a supernatural level. Lorraine's psychic abilities allow her to sense the truth, The same demon that possessed David did transfer to Arn, and it did control him during the murder. Despite the risks to Ed's health, the Warrens decide they must help. They know this will be their most challenging case yet because they need to prove demonic possession in a court of law, something that has never been successfully done in American legal history. The skepticism they will face is enormous, not just from the prosecution but from the media, the public, and even from some within the religious community. The Warrens begin their investigation by thoroughly documenting everything related to David Glatzel's possession and the exorcism. They gather testimony from everyone who was present, including Father Gordon, Judy Glatzel, and Debbie. They review their own recordings and notes from the exorcism. Lorraine uses her abilities to connect with the spiritual residue left by the demon, trying to understand its nature and origin. As Lorraine delves deeper into the psychic realm, she begins to have disturbing visions. She sees symbols, rituals, and a presence that suggests this demon didn't simply appear randomly. Someone summoned it. Someone with knowledge of dark magic deliberately called this entity forth and directed it toward the Glatzel family. This revelation transforms the entire investigation. They're not just dealing with a random demonic possession, they're dealing with a curse, which means there's a human perpetrator behind everything that happened. Lorraine's visions show her glimpses of occult rituals being performed, but the details are fragmented and unclear. She sees candles, strange symbols drawn in blood, objects arranged in specific patterns, and a shadowy figure performing these dark rites. She senses a powerful demonic presence that acts as a conduit for the curse, an entity she comes to identify as the occultist. The Warrens return to the Glatzel house to search for evidence. In the crawl space beneath the house, they discover a grotesque totem, a carved object embedded with occult symbols and surrounded by dried blood and other ritual materials. This totem was placed there deliberately as part of a curse to channel demonic energy into the house and target the family. The discovery of this physical evidence confirms Lorraine's psychic impressions and proves that someone with knowledge of satanic rituals is responsible. Seeking answers from Father Kastner through their research and contacts within religious circles, the Warrens learn about Father Kastner, a former Catholic priest who left the priesthood but continued studying occult activities in the region. Kastner has spent years documenting satanic cults, dark magic practitioners, and ritualistic crimes that often go unnoticed by conventional law enforcement. When the Warrens meet with Kastner, they find a man who is knowledgeable but deeply troubled by what he has learned. Kastner explains that there have been other mysterious deaths and incidents in the area that bear the hallmarks of occult activity. He tells them about people who died under strange circumstances, families who experienced unexplained tragedies, and a pattern that suggests someone has been systematically using dark magic to harm people. Kastner provides the Warrens with research materials, old newspaper clippings, and his own notes about occult activity in Connecticut. He mentions that practitioners of dark magic often use specific locations for their rituals, places that have natural energy or historical significance. He also warns them that whoever is behind this is extremely dangerous, as controlling demons requires significant knowledge and a willingness to engage with truly evil forces. Kastner's information gives the Warrens several leads to follow. They begin investigating the locations he mentioned, looking for evidence of ritualistic activity. Lorraine continues to have visions that gradually become clearer, showing her more details about the rituals and the person performing them. Uncovering the satanic network. As the Warrens dig deeper, they discover evidence of an entire underground network of occult activity. They find abandoned buildings where rituals were performed, with walls covered in satanic symbols and floors stained with what appears to be blood. They discover animal remains that were clearly used in sacrifices, arranged in specific patterns according to dark magic traditions. At one location, Lorraine experiences an intense psychic vision that nearly overwhelms her. She sees through the eyes of the demon itself, experiencing its perspective as it was summoned and commanded to possess David Glatzel. The vision is terrifying and disorienting, but it provides crucial information. Lorraine sees the person who performed the summoning ritual more clearly now, a woman, conducting the ceremony alone with absolute confidence and skill. The Warrens also uncover evidence of previous victims. They find records of people who died or experienced tragedies that align with occult symbolism and timing. Each victim seems to have been targeted for specific reasons, though the pattern isn't immediately clear. What becomes obvious is that this isn't the work of an amateur. The perpetrator has been practicing dark magic for years and has successfully controlled demonic forces multiple times. During their investigation, Ed and Lorraine face supernatural resistance. The demon that possessed Arn is still active in the spiritual realm, and it doesn't want to be traced back to its summoner. They experience attacks, objects moving on their own, threatening apparitions, and moments where they feel the crushing presence of evil trying to intimidate them into abandoning their investigation. One particularly terrifying encounter occurs when Lorraine is pulled into a vision so deep that she becomes trapped between the physical and spiritual worlds. She finds herself in a dark realm where the occultist demon manifests in its true horrifying form. The entity is grotesque, powerful, and filled with malevolent intelligence. It shows her terrible things, trying to break her spirit and her faith. Ed, sensing Lorraine is in danger, uses prayer and holy water to anchor her and pull her back to reality, but the experience leaves them both shaken. The waterbed attack back in their own home, the Warrens are not safe from supernatural assault. In one of the film's most memorable and frightening sequences, Ed and Lorraine are attacked while sleeping on their waterbed. The demonic forces manipulating the water create an undulating, living entity that tries to drown them. Ed wakes first, sensing something wrong. The water in the mattress begins moving independently, forming waves and shapes that shouldn't be possible. Suddenly, unseen forces pull Ed down into the bed, the water enveloping him as if it has become quicksand. He struggles to breathe as he's dragged deeper into the mattress. Lorraine wakes to find Ed being attacked and tries to help him, but she too is pulled into the water. The mattress has become a portal to something dark, and they're both being dragged toward it. They can feel the presence of the demon, using the water as a medium to attack them in their own home. The assault is both physical and psychological, designed to terrify them into abandoning the case. Using their faith and their years of experience fighting supernatural evil, Ed and Lorraine manage to break free. Ed grabs a blessed crucifix from their nightstand, and together they pray intensely, calling on divine protection. The attack subsides, the water returns to normal, and they're left gasping and soaked but alive. This attack proves how desperately the demonic forces want to stop their investigation and how close they're getting to the truth. Identifying the culprit, following more leads, and piecing together information from multiple sources, the Warrens make a shocking discovery. The person responsible for the curse is Isla Kastner, the daughter of Father Kastner, the very man who has been helping them with their investigation. Isla grew up with access to her father's extensive research on occult practices. While her father studied these dark arts to understand and combat them, Isla became fascinated by the power they offered. Over time, she secretly began practicing dark magic herself, learning from her father's materials and experimenting with rituals and demon summoning. Father Kastner had no idea his daughter had taken this dark path. Isla hid her activities carefully, presenting herself as a normal person while secretly conducting horrific rituals. Her motivations are rooted in a twisted belief system and a desire for power and control. She sees herself as someone who has mastered forces that others fear, and she uses curses to punish people she believes have wronged her or simply as experiments to test and expand her abilities. The Glatzel family was targeted seemingly at random, or perhaps because of some perceived slight, or simply because they fit the requirements of a ritual Isla wanted to perform. The randomness of her evil makes it even more disturbing. Innocent people like David, Arne, and the Glatzels became victims of her dark practices through no fault of their own. When the Warrens confront Father Kastner with this information, he is devastated and horrified. He never suspected his own daughter could be capable of such evil. However, he provides them with information about where Isla lives and where she likely performs her rituals. He also warns them about how dangerous she has become, as years of practicing dark magic have given her significant supernatural power and potentially demonic protection. The confrontation. Armed with this knowledge, the Warrens travel to Isla's property, a remote and isolated area that immediately feels wrong. The land itself seems corrupted, with dead vegetation, unusual silence, and an oppressive atmosphere that makes it difficult to breathe. They discover evidence everywhere of occult activity, symbols carved into trees, arrangements of stones in ritual patterns, and remnants of ceremonies. Following spiritual guidance and Lorraine's psychic senses, they locate an underground area beneath an old structure on the property. Descending into this space, they find a full satanic altar surrounded by evidence of numerous rituals. There are human bones, clear indications that Isla has not only cursed people but has also committed murder as part of her practices. The walls are covered in symbols painted in blood, and the air is thick with malevolent energy. As they're examining the altar and gathering evidence, Isla appears. She is calm and confident, not at all surprised to see them. She admits to everything, summoning the demon, cursing the Glatzel family, and causing all the suffering that followed. She shows no remorse whatsoever, viewing her actions as expressions of power and mastery over spiritual forces. Isla reveals that she has protection from the demons she serves. In exchange for her devotion and the sacrifices she has made, powerful entities have granted her their favor and protection. She believes she is untouchable and mocks the Warrens' attempts to stop her or gather evidence against her. Lorraine attempts to reason with Isla, appealing to whatever humanity might remain in her, but Isla has gone too far down the dark path. She has given herself over completely to evil forces and has become something barely human in her psychology and spirituality. The confrontation escalates into a full supernatural battle. Isla calls upon the demons she serves, including the occultist entity. The underground chamber becomes a battlefield between good and evil, faith and darkness. Demonic manifestations appear, horrible apparitions that attack the Warrens both physically and spiritually. Objects fly through the air, the ground shakes, and the very fabric of reality seems to tear as spiritual and physical realms collide. Ed, despite his weakened heart, fights alongside Lorraine. He uses holy water, blessed objects, and prayers that he has memorized from years of battling evil. Lorraine uses her psychic abilities combined with her faith to combat the demonic forces. She enters a spiritual battle with the occultist demon itself, a clash of wills where her faith and goodness are pitted against the entity's malevolence and power. The battle reaches its climax when the Warrens locate and destroy the central altar that Isla has been using to maintain her power and her control over the demons. Ed smashes the ritualistic objects with a blessed iron rod while Lorraine holds back the demonic forces through sheer force of will and prayer. Isla screams in rage and tries to stop them, but without her altar and totems, her power begins to fail. As the altar is destroyed, there is a massive spiritual rupture. The demons that Isla had been controlling are suddenly released from her influence. The curses she had placed are broken, including the one on Arne Johnson. The occultist demon, no longer bound to do Isla's bidding, turns its attention to her. In a moment of dark irony, the very forces Isla thought she controlled become her destruction. The entity drags her into the spiritual darkness, and her screams fade as she disappears, presumably taken by the demons she once commanded. The underground chamber collapses partially as the spiritual energy dissipates. Ed and Lorraine barely escape, emerging from the property battered, exhausted, but victorious. They have broken the curse and ended Isla's reign of terror. More importantly, they have freed Arn from the demonic possession, which is crucial for his legal defense. The trial and resolution with the curse broken and evidence gathered from Isla's property, the Warrens present their case to Arnie's defense team. They provide the physical evidence, the totems, ritual materials, documentation of the occult network, and testimony about what they discovered. They explain how Arn was an innocent victim of a curse cast by someone practicing dark magic, and how he was possessed by a demon at the time of the murder. Arnie's trial becomes a media sensation. The idea of using demonic possession as a legal defense is unprecedented and controversial. The prosecution argues that there is no scientific evidence for possession and that Arn is simply trying to avoid responsibility for a brutal murder. The defense, supported by the Warrens' testimony, argues that Arn was not in control of his actions and should not be held criminally responsible for something a demonic entity did while controlling his body. Ed and Lorraine testify in court about their investigation, their findings, and their expert opinion as demonologists. They present the physical evidence and describe the supernatural elements of the case. Their testimony is compelling and sincere, but they face intense cross-examination and skepticism from the prosecution and from experts who dismiss the supernatural explanation entirely. The judge ultimately rules that demonic possession cannot be used as a legal defense because it cannot be proven scientifically and because allowing such a defense would set a dangerous legal precedent. However, the jury is moved by the testimony and the unusual circumstances of the case. The evidence of Isla's occult activities, even if not accepted as proof of actual demonic activity, at least demonstrates that Arn was somehow victimized by a disturbed individual. Instead of convicting Arn of first-degree murder, which would carry a life sentence or death penalty, the jury convicts him of first-degree manslaughter. He is sentenced to prison time, but significantly less than he would have received for murder. It is a compromise verdict that acknowledges the unusual nature of the case while still holding Arn legally accountable for Bruno Saul's death. Debbie stands by Arn throughout the trial and after his conviction. She visits him regularly in prison, and they maintain their relationship despite the circumstances. She knows the truth about what happened and loves him without reservation. Arn himself, now free from the demon and aware of what occurred, accepts his sentence, understanding that even though he was possessed, a man still died, and there must be some form of earthly justice. Epilogue: the film concludes with the Warrens back at their home, adding the evidence from the case to their occult museum, a collection of cursed and haunted objects they have gathered from various investigations over the years. The totems from Isla's rituals and other artifacts are carefully stored and blessed to prevent them from causing further harm. Ed has survived the ordeal, though his heart condition remains a concern. The doctors continue to warn him about the stress of his work, but Ed and Lorraine both know they will continue their mission to help people plagued by supernatural forces. Their love for each other and their faith sustain them through the dangers they face. The real-life postscript reveals that Arn Johnson served his reduced sentence and was eventually released from prison. He and Debbie Glatzel married and built a life together, their bond strengthened by what they endured. The Warrens continued their work as paranormal investigators until Ed's death in 2006, with Lorraine carrying on until her passing in 2019. The case remains one of the most controversial and fascinating in paranormal investigation history, the only time demonic possession was attempted as a murder defense in a United States court. Whether one believes in the supernatural explanation or not, the case raises profound questions about the nature of evil, personal responsibility, and the limits of human understanding when confronted with the unexplainable. Ed Warren, the demonologist. Early life and background. Ed Warren was born Edward Warren Miney on September 7, 1926, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He grew up in a haunted house, which sparked his lifelong interest in the paranormal. As a young man, Ed served in the United States Navy during World War II. After the war, he attended Perry Art School, where he met his future wife, Lorraine. Ed initially worked as a painter, creating seascapes and religious artwork, but his true calling was investigating the supernatural. Professional work. Ed was a self-proclaimed demonologist, one of only 7 recognized by the Catholic Church at the time, though this claim has been disputed. Unlike Lorraine's natural clairvoyant abilities, Ed's expertise came from years of study, research, and fieldwork. He educated himself extensively in theology, demonology, and the rituals of exorcism. Ed authored several books about their cases, including The Demonologist and Graveyard. He was also a lecturer, teaching courses on the paranormal at colleges and speaking at conferences. Role in the film, in The Devil Made Me Do It. Set in 1981, Ed is shown at the height of his career but also at a vulnerable point. The film opens with Ed and Lorraine conducting the exorcism of 8-year-old David Glatzel in Brookfield, Connecticut. During this intense exorcism, Ed witnesses Arn Johnson invite the demon to leave David and possess him instead. The spiritual and physical strain of this exorcism proves too much for Ed. He suffers a massive heart attack and nearly dies. This heart attack becomes a crucial plot point. Ed is hospitalized and weakened, forcing Lorraine to take the lead in the investigation for the first time. We see Ed struggling with his physical limitations, frustrated that he cannot be out in the field. He's shown in hospital beds, then recovering at home, offering guidance and support to Lorraine via phone calls. His medical crisis adds emotional weight to the story. Lorraine is not only fighting to save Arn Johnson but also terrified of losing her husband and partner. Personal characteristics. Ed is portrayed as deeply Catholic, brave, and protective. He's the warrior in the Warren partnership, willing to physically confront demonic entities, perform rituals, and put himself in harm's way. He's shown as loving toward Lorraine, respectful toward the families they help, and absolutely convinced of the reality of demonic forces. Patrick Wilson plays him with a mix of confidence and vulnerability in this film. Lorraine Warren, the clairvoyant. Early life and spiritual gifts. Lorraine Rita Moran was born on January 31, 1927, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. From a very young age, Lorraine realized she had abilities that others didn't possess. She was a natural clairvoyant and light trance medium, meaning she could see, sense, and communicate with spirits and supernatural entities. She could experience visions, sense presences, and feel the emotions and intentions of both earthly and otherworldly beings. This gift was both a blessing and a burden. She was often overwhelmed by what she could perceive. Meeting Ed and their partnership. Lorraine met Ed Warren when she was just 16 years old at a movie theater where Ed was working as an usher. They married in 1945 when she was 18. Initially, Ed would paint houses while Lorraine stayed home. However, Ed began painting scenes of haunted houses and would take Lorraine with him to these locations. It was during these visits that they realized Lorraine's abilities could be used to help people plagued by supernatural problems. Thus began their paranormal investigation career, which would span over 50 years. Professional work. Lorraine served as the spiritual detector in their investigations. While Ed handled the intellectual and theological aspects, Lorraine provided the intuitive, psychic element. She could walk into a location and immediately sense whether a presence was human, inhuman, demonic, or residual, a recording of past events. Her abilities made her invaluable but also put her at great spiritual risk. She was often targeted by malevolent entities. Lorraine was also a devout Catholic who believed her gifts came from God and should be used to help others. She frequently worked with priests and the Catholic Church. Role in the film. The Devil Made Me Do It gives Lorraine her most prominent role in the franchise. After Ed's heart attack, she must lead the investigation into Arne Johnson's case largely on her own. The film shows Lorraine grappling with fear for Ed's health, fear for Arnie's fate, and fear of the powerful demonic forces at work. We see Lorraine using her abilities extensively. She experiences visions of the demon, she senses the occult connections to Arnie's possession, and she tracks down clues through psychic impressions. One particularly intense scene shows Lorraine using her connection to the demon to trace it back to its source, experiencing terrifying visions in the process. She visits the Glatzel home, the murder scene, and eventually tracks the source to an occultist's lair. Lorraine is shown as determined and brave, but also deeply human. She's exhausted, frightened, and pushed to her limits. She relies on her faith, her love for Ed, and her conviction that Arne is innocent. She works closely with their investigative assistant Drew Thomas and ultimately confronts the occultist responsible for the possessions. Personal characteristics. Vera Farmiga portrays Lorraine as gentle yet fierce, spiritual yet practical. She's maternal toward the families they help, especially young David Glatzel. She's shown as a woman of deep faith who sees her gifts as a responsibility. The film also emphasizes her partnership with Ed. They're not just colleagues but soulmates, and the thought of losing him drives much of her emotional journey in this film. Arne Cheyenne Johnson. The possessed background and early life. Arne Johnson was born in 1962, making him 19 years old during the events of the film in 1981. He grew up in Connecticut and came from a working-class background. Little is shown of his childhood or family in the film, but he's portrayed as a kind, hard-working young man without any history of violence or mental illness. He worked manual labor jobs and was known to be gentle and responsible. Life before possession. At 19, Arne was working as a tree surgeon and also helped out at Brookfield's Relax-A-While Kennels, a dog kennel managed by his landlord. He was living in an apartment above the kennel. Arne was deeply in love with Debbie Glatzel, and they were engaged to be married. He had a close relationship with Debbie's family, particularly her younger brother David, whom he saw as a little brother. Arne was described by those who knew him as responsible, loving, and completely devoted to Debbie. The possession. When David Glatzel began experiencing terrifying demonic attacks, Arne was present and witnessed the boy's suffering. The Glatzels called in Ed and Lorraine Warren to help. During the exorcism of David, Arne made a fateful decision that would change his life forever. Seeing the 8-year-old boy writhing in agony, possessed by a malevolent demon, Arne, in an act of pure selflessness, challenged the demon directly. He shouted at it to take him instead, to leave the child alone and possess him instead. The demon accepted this invitation. The film shows the moment when the demonic entity transfers from David to Arne, entering through his body. At first, Arne seems fine, believing he saved David. But the possession doesn't manifest immediately in obvious ways. Instead, it lies dormant, waiting. The possession manifests violently on February 16, 1981. Arne was at work at the kennel when he began experiencing disturbing visions and hallucinations. In his possessed state, he saw his landlord, Bruno Sauls, as a demonic figure. The demon took control, and Arne brutally stabbed Bruno Sauls multiple times with a pocket knife, killing him. The murder was savage and completely out of character for Arne. After the murder, Arne fled, disoriented and confused. He was found later, miles away, with no clear memory of what had happened. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The possession had left him during or after the murder, leaving Arne to face the consequences of actions he couldn't control. The trial, Arne's case, became infamous as the "Devil Made Me Do It" case, the first known court case in United States history where the defense attempted to prove innocence based on demonic possession. Arne's lawyer, Martin Minella, though not prominently featured in the film, argued that Arne was not guilty by reason of demonic possession. The Warrens supported this defense, with Lorraine working tirelessly to prove that supernatural forces were responsible. The film shows Arne in jail, confused and traumatized. He loves Debbie and is tormented by what he's done. He cooperates with the Warrens' investigation, though he has little memory of the possession or the murder. He's portrayed as a victim, an innocent young man who made a noble sacrifice to save a child and ended up destroying his own life. Personal characteristics: Rory O'Connor plays Arne with vulnerability and quiet strength. He's shown as genuinely good-hearted, the kind of young man who would sacrifice himself for a child without hesitation. His relationship with Debbie is tender and real, they're young people in love, planning a future together. The tragedy of Arne's story is that his heroic act led to his downfall. The film portrays him sympathetically, emphasizing that he's not a murderer but a victim of forces beyond human understanding. Debbie Glatzel, the devoted fiancée. Background: Debbie Glatzel was in her late teens/early 20s during the events of the film. She lived with her family in Brookfield, Connecticut. Her parents, Carl and Judy Glatzel, and her younger brother David. The Glatzels were a working-class Catholic family. Work and life: Debbie worked as a dog groomer at the Brookfield Kennels, where Arne also worked. This is how they met and fell in love. She was practical, hardworking, and devoted to her family. When the family moved into a new rental home and David began experiencing paranormal activity, Debbie was one of the first to witness it and believe him. Role in the film: Debbie is portrayed as fiercely loyal and brave. When David was being tormented by demonic forces, she supported calling in the Warrens and participated in the exorcism. She was present when Arne made his fateful decision to invite the demon into himself. The film shows her horror and helplessness as she realizes what Arne has done. After Arne commits murder, Debbie never wavers in her support for him. She visits him in jail, believes in his innocence, and works with the Warrens to prove that he was possessed. She's shown as strong despite her youth, refusing to abandon Arne even when the situation seems hopeless. Her love for him is unwavering, and she provides him with emotional support throughout his incarceration and trial. Personal characteristics: Sarah Catherine Hook portrays Debbie as determined and loving. She's caught between two people she loves, her little brother David and her fiancé Arne. The trauma of watching both of them suffer takes its toll, but she doesn't break. She represents the human cost of these supernatural events, an ordinary young woman whose life is torn apart by forces she can't control. David Glatzel, the child victim. Background: David Glatzel was 8 years old in 1981. He was a normal, happy child living with his parents and sister Debbie in Connecticut. He attended school, played like any other child, and had no history of psychological problems or behavioral issues. The haunting: everything changed when the Glatzel family moved into a new rental home. Shortly after moving in, David began experiencing terrifying encounters. He reported seeing an old man with burnt skin and dark eyes who would appear in his room at night. This entity would threaten him, torment him, and tell him horrible things. His family initially thought he was having nightmares, but the encounters escalated. David began to exhibit signs of possession, speaking in voices not his own, displaying knowledge he couldn't possibly have, showing superhuman strength, and experiencing violent convulsions. He would scream about seeing demons and monsters. His behavior became erratic and frightening. The entity tormenting him was not a ghost but something far worse, an inhuman, demonic presence. The exorcism, the Glatzel family, being Catholic, contacted the Warrens for help. Ed and Lorraine determined that David was indeed possessed and arranged for an exorcism. The film opens with this exorcism scene, one of the most intense in the franchise. David is shown tied to a waterbed, writhing and screaming, his voice not his own. The demon speaks through him in guttural, terrifying tones. It takes multiple priests and the Warrens to perform the ritual. During the exorcism, when Arn challenges the demon to take him instead, David is finally freed. The demon leaves his body, and he collapses, exhausted but no longer possessed. The trauma of this experience, however, would stay with him forever. Role in the film: David appears primarily in the opening exorcism sequence, and then in recovery scenes. He's shown as traumatized, quiet, and withdrawn after his ordeal. The film uses David to establish the reality of the demonic threat and to motivate Arnie's sacrifice. Julian Hilliard plays David with genuine terror and vulnerability, making the audience feel the horror of a child facing supernatural evil. Impact: David's possession is the catalyst for everything that follows in the film. His suffering leads to Arnie's possession, which leads to murder, which leads to the trial. He's the innocent victim whose nightmare sets the entire plot in motion. Isla the occultist, antagonist, background and history. Isla is a mysterious and deeply disturbed character. The film reveals that she was once part of a satanic cult, serving as a disciple to darker powers. At some point, she left or was expelled from the cult, but rather than renouncing her dark practices, she continued them in isolation. She became a solitary occultist, living as a recluse and practicing forbidden rituals. Her backstory suggests deep trauma and a complete surrender to evil. She's shown as someone who has given up her humanity in exchange for dark power. The film implies she's been practicing occult rituals for years, perhaps decades, killing people through curses and demonic invocations. Motivations and methods: Isla's method of killing is elaborate and ritualistic. She creates totems, occult objects made from organic materials, bones, and symbols, and places them in locations connected to her intended victims. These totems serve as conduits for demonic forces. Once activated through ritual, the totems allow demons to possess or torment the victims, ultimately leading to their deaths. The film reveals that Isla has been responsible for multiple deaths, all disguised as accidents, suicides, or in Arnie's case, a crime of passion. Her victims are sacrifices to dark powers, though her ultimate goal is never fully explained. She seems to kill for the sake of the ritual itself, feeding some dark need or obligation. Connection to the Glatzels: the investigation reveals that Isla targeted the Glatzel family specifically. One of her totems was hidden in the foundation of the house the Glatzels rented, which is why David became possessed. The curse was meant to lead to death in the family. When Arn took the demon from David, he unknowingly transferred the curse to himself, which resulted in Bruno Saul's murder. Physical appearance and lifestyle: Isla lives in a dilapidated, isolated property filled with occult paraphernalia. Her home is dark, filled with candles, bones, ritualistic drawings, and altars. She's shown as physically deteriorated, gaunt, with sunken eyes and a disturbing presence. Eugenie Bondurant plays her with minimal dialogue, relying on physical performance to convey menace. Isla moves in unsettling ways and seems barely human, consumed by the darkness she serves. Final confrontation: when Lorraine tracks Isla down to her lair, the confrontation is both physical and spiritual. Isla attempts to kill Lorraine using her occult powers, and a violent struggle ensues. The film shows Isla as powerful and dangerous, able to manipulate the environment and attack through supernatural means. However, Lorraine's faith and determination prove stronger. In the climactic fight, Lorraine manages to defeat Isla, breaking her connection to the demonic forces and saving Arn from continued possession. Symbolic role: Isla represents the human choice to embrace evil. While demons are inherently malevolent, Isla is a human who chose to serve darkness. She's a cautionary figure showing how far someone can fall when they reject goodness and embrace occult power. Supporting characters: Drew Thomas. Shannon Kook Drew is the Warrens' young assistant and investigator. He helps with research, accompanies Lorraine on investigations, and provides technical support. He's loyal, brave, and dedicated to the Warrens' work. In this film, he plays a larger role than in previous installments, often accompanying Lorraine when Ed cannot. He represents the next generation of paranormal investigators. Father Gordon, Steve Coulter, a Catholic priest who works with the Warrens. He assists in the exorcism of David and provides spiritual counsel throughout the investigation. He represents the church's role in battling demonic forces. Bruno Sauls, Arnie's landlord and the murder victim. He's shown briefly before his death as a somewhat unpleasant but not evil man. His murder is the central crime of the film. The Glatzel's, Carl and Judy, David and Debbie's parents, who are desperate to help their children and cooperate fully with the Warrens. They represent typical American parents thrust into extraordinary supernatural circumstances. Themes and historical context: the film is based on the real 1981 case, though it takes significant creative liberties. The real Arn Johnson served 5 years for manslaughter. The possession defense was not allowed. The Warrens genuinely investigated this case and supported the possession theory. The film explores themes of sacrifice, faith, love, and the battle between good and evil. It shows how ordinary people can become caught up in supernatural warfare, and how faith and love can triumph over darkness. The actual events. The case that inspired this film is one of the most controversial and well-documented incidents in American legal and paranormal history. On February 16, 1981, in Brookfield, Connecticut, 19-year-old Arn Cheyenne Johnson stabbed his landlord, Alan Bono, changed to Bruno Sauls, in the film, multiple times, killing him. This murder occurred outside the Brookfield kennels where Johnson worked and lived. However, the events leading up to this murder were anything but ordinary. 2 months earlier, in the winter of 1980 to 1981, Debbie Glatzel's 11-year-old brother David, 8 in the film, began experiencing what the family believed were demonic attacks. David reported seeing a frightening old man with burnt, blackened skin who would appear in his bedroom and threaten him. The boy exhibited classic signs of what religious authorities would consider possession, speaking in unknown languages, displaying superhuman strength for his age, having knowledge he shouldn't possess, violent convulsions, and speaking in voices that were not his own. The exorcism. The Glatzel family, being Catholic, sought help from their local parish. Eventually, Ed and Lorraine Warren became involved in the case. According to the Warrens' account and the Glatzel family's testimony, David underwent not one but multiple exorcisms. Sources vary, but some accounts claim as many as 6 to 15 minor exorcisms and blessings were performed over several weeks. These were not full Roman Catholic exorcisms, which require special permission from the Vatican, but rather prayers of deliverance and blessings performed by local priests. During one of these sessions, Arn Johnson, who was present as Debbie's fiancé and had grown close to young David, allegedly challenged the demon directly, telling it to leave the boy and take him instead. According to the Warrens and witnesses present, this is when the possession transferred from David to Arn, though the effects were not immediately apparent. The murder. On that February day in 1981, Arn Johnson, his fiancée Debbie, and her younger sister Wanda went to lunch with their landlord Alan Bono at a local restaurant. They drank wine. Some accounts suggest Bono drank heavily, and later that afternoon, back at the kennel, an argument broke out. What exactly precipitated the argument remains unclear. Some accounts suggest Bono was making unwanted advances toward Debbie or Wanda, while other reports suggest it was a dispute about rent or the kennels. What is undisputed is that Arn Johnson took out a 5-inch pocket knife and stabbed Alan Bono repeatedly between 10 to 20 times according to various reports, killing him. After the murder, Johnson fled the scene. He was found by police hours later, approximately 2 miles away from the crime scene, wandering in a dazed state on a road. He had no clear recollection of what had happened and seemed confused and disoriented. The trial. The devil made me do it. This is where the case became historically unprecedented. Johnson's attorney, Martin Minnella, who appears only briefly in the film, decided on an extraordinary defense strategy. He would argue that Arn Johnson was not guilty by reason of demonic possession. This had never been attempted in a United States court of law. Minnella's argument was that Johnson could not be held responsible for the murder because he was not in control of his own actions. A demon was. This was not insanity in the traditional legal sense, but rather a claim that an external, supernatural force had taken over his body and committed the act. The Warrens provided extensive testimony and documentation to support this claim, including their records from David Glatzel's exorcism and Arnie's subsequent possession. The judge's ruling, presiding Judge Robert Callahan, faced a unique dilemma. While the defense was creative and unprecedented, it raised serious constitutional issues. Allowing demonic possession as a defense would require the court to determine whether demons exist, whether possession is real, and whether it occurred in this specific case. This would effectively require the court to make religious determinations, which violates the separation of church and state enshrined in the First Amendment. Judge Callahan ruled that demonic possession could not be used as a defense. He stated that while the court could consider mental illness, it could not and would not rule on the existence or non-existence of demons or the supernatural. The possession defense was excluded from evidence. The verdict and aftermath. Without the possession defense, the trial proceeded on more conventional grounds. The prosecution argued first-degree murder, claiming Johnson killed Bono in a fit of rage, possibly motivated by jealousy or anger. The defense, stripped of its supernatural argument, pivoted to arguing that Johnson was intoxicated and that the killing was not premeditated. On November 24, 1981, Arn Johnson was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter, not murder, which suggested the jury did not believe it was premeditated. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. However, he served only 5 years before being released on good behavior in 1986. During his incarceration, Debbie Glatzel remained faithful to him, and they married while he was in prison. They remained together for years afterward, though they eventually divorced decades later. Controversy and skepticism. The case was and remains controversial. Many skeptics argued that the possession claims were either fabricated or the result of mental illness, suggestibility, and the influence of the Warrens. Some family members later recanted or disputed parts of the story. David Glatzel's brother, Carl Glatzel Jr., later claimed the entire possession story was fabricated by the Warrens to sell books and gain publicity, and he sued them and the filmmakers, though the lawsuit was dismissed. Mental health professionals suggested David may have suffered from Tourette's syndrome, schizophrenia, or other psychological conditions that could explain his behavior. Regarding Arn, some suggested the murder was simply a crime of passion, possibly influenced by alcohol, with the possession story constructed afterward to avoid a murder conviction. The Warrens' involvement. For Ed and Lorraine Warren, this case became one of their most famous. They wrote about it extensively, gave lectures, and maintained until their deaths. Ed died in 2006, Lorraine in 2019, that the possession was absolutely real. They claimed to have extensive documentation, including recordings from the exorcisms, photographs, and witness testimonies. The case cemented their reputation as America's foremost paranormal investigators, though it also intensified criticism from skeptics who viewed them as charlatans exploiting tragedy and mental illness. The early 1980s, cultural and social context, religious climate. The early 1980s in America saw a significant rise in evangelical Christianity and renewed interest in religious fundamentalism. This satanic panic was beginning to take hold, a moral panic that would peak in the mid to late 1980s, characterized by widespread fear of satanic ritual abuse, occult influences in popular culture, and demonic activity. This created a cultural environment where claims of demonic possession were taken more seriously by certain segments of society than they might be today. The Catholic Church, while more measured than evangelical movements, was still very much engaged with the concept of exorcism and demonic possession. The rite of exorcism had not been abandoned, and priests still performed these rituals, though the Church maintained strict protocols requiring psychiatric evaluation before proceeding with exorcism. Legal precedent: the "devil made me do it" defense, while novel in American law, had some distant precedents. Throughout history, various cultures and legal systems had considered supernatural explanations for criminal behavior. However, in modern American jurisprudence, which is grounded in secular principles and scientific evidence, such defenses were virtually unheard of. The Johnson case tested the boundaries between religious belief and legal responsibility. Media coverage: the case received enormous media attention. It was featured in newspapers across the country, television news programs, and became the subject of books. The Warrens capitalized on this publicity, writing their book, The Devil in Connecticut, with Gerald Brittle, in 1983. The case represented a collision between traditional religious beliefs and modern skepticism, playing out in a very public forum. Connecticut setting: Brookfield, Connecticut, where the murder occurred, is a small, relatively quiet town in Fairfield County. The area has a strong Catholic presence and traditional New England values. The community was deeply shaken by the murder and the bizarre claims surrounding it. This wasn't New York City or Los Angeles, this was small-town America, where such events seemed particularly shocking and out of place. Major themes: 1. Sacrifice and selflessness central to the narrative. The most prominent theme in The Devil Made Me Do It is sacrifice, specifically, the idea of willingly accepting suffering to save another. Arn Johnson's decision to invite the demon into himself to save young David Glatzel is portrayed as an act of pure, selfless love. This mirrors the Christian concept of substitutionary atonement, one person bearing the punishment or suffering meant for another. Theological dimensions: the film draws heavily on Christ-like sacrifice imagery. Just as Jesus is believed by Christians to have taken upon himself the sins of humanity to save them from damnation, Arn takes upon himself the demon tormenting David. This is not accidental. The Warrens were devout Catholics, and their worldview was steeped in Christian theology. The film presents Arn as a tragic hero whose noble act leads to his downfall, raising questions about the fairness of divine justice and the cost of love. Consequences of sacrifice. However, the film doesn't romanticize sacrifice entirely. It shows the devastating consequences. Arn commits murder, goes to prison, loses years of his life, and carries psychological trauma. Debbie must watch her fiancé suffer for saving her brother. The film asks, is such sacrifice worth it? Should one person destroy their life to save another? These are profound moral questions without easy answers. Ed and Lorraine's sacrifice. The theme extends to the Warrens themselves. They sacrificed their safety, health, and peace of mind to help strangers. Ed literally suffers a heart attack from the spiritual strain of the exorcism. Lorraine repeatedly puts herself in danger, facing demonic forces that could destroy her soul. Their marriage is tested by the constant threat of death and darkness. The film portrays their work as a calling that demands everything from them. 2. Faith versus skepticism. The central tension. Throughout the film, there's a fundamental clash between those who believe in the supernatural and those who seek rational, scientific explanations. This reflects the real-life debate surrounding the Warrens' cases. The film itself takes a clear position: the supernatural is real, but it acknowledges the skepticism of others. Institutional skepticism. The legal system represents organized skepticism. The judge cannot and will not consider demonic possession as a legal defense because doing so would require accepting religious claims as legal fact. This represents the Enlightenment principle of secular governance. Courts deal with evidence, not faith. The film portrays this as both reasonable, the law must be based on evidence, and tragic, Arn cannot tell his true story. Medical and psychological perspectives. Though not deeply explored in the film, there's an implicit acknowledgement that modern psychiatry and medicine would explain David's possession as mental illness and Arnie's actions as a psychological break, or the result of suggestion and trauma. The film sidesteps this by simply asserting the supernatural as fact, but the historical case involves significant debate about whether mental health professionals should have been consulted instead of exorcists. The Warrens as believers, Ed and Lorraine, represent absolute faith. Their certainty never wavers. They know demons are real because they've encountered them repeatedly. This unwavering belief is portrayed as both their greatest strength. It allows them to confront evil without doubt, and a source of conflict with the broader society that views them as delusional or fraudulent. Personal faith. The film also explores personal faith: Debbie's faith in Arnie's innocence, Arnie's faith that his sacrifice was worth it, and the Glatzel family's faith that prayer and ritual can save them. Faith is presented as both comforting, providing hope in hopeless situations, and demanding, requiring belief without proof. Point 3. Love as protection and motivation. Romantic love. Arn and Debbie's relationship is central to the film's emotional core. Their love is portrayed as pure and enduring. It survives possession, murder, imprisonment, and public scandal. Debbie never abandons Arn. She visits him in jail, believes in him when no one else does, and fights for his freedom. The film suggests that true love is unconditional and transcends even the worst circumstances. This portrayal serves multiple purposes. It makes Arn sympathetic. He's not a monster, he's a young man in love. It provides emotional stakes. We want these two young people to have a future together, and it reinforces the film's spiritual message. Love is the strongest force, even against demonic evil. Familial love. Arnie's love for David is portrayed as brotherly and protective. He views David as family even though they're not blood-related. This familial bond is what motivates his sacrifice. Similarly, Debbie's love for her brother drives her to seek help from the Warrens. The Glatzel family's love for each other keeps them together through terrifying ordeals. The Warrens' marriage, Ed and Lorraine's relationship, is perhaps the most important love story in the film. They are portrayed as soulmates whose bond has been forged through decades of shared danger and purpose. When Ed nearly dies, Lorraine's fear of losing him is palpable. Their love for each other is what sustains them through their dangerous work. The film suggests that their marriage is not just romantic but spiritual. They are partners in a holy mission. Love versus evil. A key theme is that love is the ultimate weapon against evil. Demons can possess bodies, manipulate reality, and cause physical harm, but they cannot overcome genuine love. Lorraine defeats Isla not through superior power but through the strength of her love for Ed, her compassion for victims, and her faith in goodness. This is a deeply Christian concept. Perfect love casts out fear. 1 John 4 verse 18.4. Good versus evil, the eternal battle, cosmic warfare. The film presents a worldview in which humanity exists in the middle of a cosmic war between God and Satan, angels and demons, light and darkness. This is not metaphorical, it's literal spiritual warfare. Humans are both battlefield and prize in this conflict. The Warrens are portrayed as soldiers for God, actively fighting demonic forces. The nature of evil. The film explores what evil actually is. The demon is portrayed as pure malevolence. It has no redeeming qualities, no sympathetic motivations. It exists only to corrupt, torture, and destroy. This is evil in its absolute form. However, the film also shows human evil in the character of Isla. She's a human who chose to serve darkness, which makes her evil different from the demons. Hers is a moral failure, a corruption of free will. The corrupted versus the possessed. The film makes a distinction between those who choose evil, Isla, and those who are victimized by it, David Arn. This is important theologically. It addresses the question of culpability. David is innocent. He did nothing to invite the demon. Arn invited it in, but for selfless reasons, making him a victim rather than a villain. Isla, however, actively practices evil, making her morally responsible. Victory and defeat. The film shows that evil can be defeated, but not without cost. The Warrens win their battles, but Ed is permanently weakened by his heart attack. Arn is freed from possession, but he's still in prison. Victory is real but never complete. In this life the war continues. This reflects a Catholic theology of the already but not yet. Good will ultimately triumph, but not until the end of time. 5. Institutional authority versus individual experience. The Church's role. The Catholic Church is portrayed as both helper and obstacle. On one hand, priests assist with the exorcisms, and the Church's rituals are shown to have real power against demons. On the other hand, the Church is bureaucratic and cautious. It requires extensive documentation and approval before performing official exorcisms, which can delay help for victims. The Warrens exist in a gray area. They work with the Church, but are not officially part of its hierarchy. Ed is a layman, not a priest, yet he performs many of the functions of an exorcist. This creates tension between institutional authority. The Church decides what's real, and individual experience. The Warrens know what they've seen. Legal authority. The court system represents secular institutional authority. It has rules, precedents, and procedures that cannot easily accommodate claims of supernatural activity. The judge who excludes the possession defense isn't portrayed as evil, or even wrong. He's following the law. But this means the law is inadequate to address certain kinds of truth. The film suggests that some realities exist beyond what institutions can acknowledge. Personal testimony. Against institutional authority, the film elevates personal testimony and lived experience. The Glatzel's know what happened to their son. Arn knows he was possessed. Debbie knows her fiancé is not a murderer. The Warrens know demons are real. This knowledge comes from direct experience, not from institutional validation. The film asks, when institutions deny your reality, do you doubt your own experience or the institution? 6. Trauma and its aftermath. Psychological impact. Though the film focuses on supernatural horror, it doesn't ignore psychological trauma. David is clearly traumatized by his possession. He's quiet, withdrawn, and scared even after the demon leaves. Arn is traumatized both by being possessed and by committing murder. The film shows him in jail, haunted and confused, struggling to understand what he did. Collective trauma. the Glatzel family experiences collective trauma. Their home was invaded by evil, their child was tortured, their future son-in-law became a murderer. How does a family recover from such events? The film doesn't fully explore this, but it acknowledges that trauma ripples outward, affecting everyone connected to the victims. The Warrens' trauma, Ed and Lorraine carry the accumulated trauma of decades of encountering evil. Lorraine is shown as exhausted and frightened. She's seen terrible things, and they've taken a toll on her. Ed nearly dies. The film suggests that confronting evil repeatedly damages people, even when they're on the side of good. This is a form of compassionate realism. Heroes suffer consequences. Recovery and resilience. Despite trauma, characters show resilience. David survives and recovers. Debbie doesn't break under the strain. Lorraine continues fighting despite her fear. The film suggests that while trauma is real and damaging, humans have a capacity for resilience, especially when supported by love and faith. 7. The limits of human understanding. Unknowable evil. The film presents demons as fundamentally beyond human comprehension. Their origins, their true nature, their ultimate goals, these remain mysterious. Even the Warrens, with all their experience, don't fully understand what they're fighting. This creates a sense of cosmic horror. We're confronted with intelligences that are alien and malevolent. The mystery of faith, religious faith, as portrayed in the film, requires accepting things beyond understanding. Why does God allow demons to exist? Why do innocent children suffer possession? Why doesn't divine intervention prevent murders? These questions are not answered. The characters must have faith despite not understanding, which is presented as a virtue rather than a weakness. The unexplained. The film leaves many things unexplained. How exactly do totems work? Why did Isla target the Glatzels specifically? What happened to the demon after it left Arn? This reflects a worldview in which mystery is inherent to existence. Not everything can or should be explained. 8. Justice. Divine versus human. Incompatible systems. The film explores the conflict between human justice, the legal system, and divine justice, moral/spiritual righteousness. Human justice says Arn committed murder and must be punished. Divine justice recognizes he was not in control and is therefore not morally culpable. These two systems cannot be reconciled. The question of fairness. Is it fair that Arn goes to prison for something he didn't choose to do? Is it fair that David suffered possession as an innocent child? Is it fair that the Warrens risked their lives repeatedly to help others? The film raises these questions without offering easy answers. It suggests that fairness, as humans understand it, may not be how the universe operates. Punishment and redemption. Arn is punished by the legal system but is spiritually innocent. This creates a tragic irony. He's imprisoned for being a hero. However, the film also suggests that suffering can have redemptive value, a very Catholic concept. Through his ordeal, Arnie's love for Debbie is proven and strengthened. His sacrifice, though costly, was not meaningless. 9. The power and danger of curses/rituals. Occult power. The film presents occult practices as genuinely powerful. Isla's rituals actually work. They summon demons, cause possessions, and lead to deaths. This is not superstition or psychological suggestion. It's real metaphysical power. This raises disturbing implications. If evil rituals work, then dark power is accessible to anyone willing to pay its price. The corruption of knowledge. Isla's knowledge of occult practices has corrupted her completely. The film suggests that some knowledge is dangerous not because it's false, but because it's true and deadly. This reflects ancient warnings about forbidden knowledge, going back to the Garden of Eden. Some things are not meant to be known or practiced. Counter rituals. The Warrens fight occult power with religious ritual prayers, blessings, holy water, crucifixes. The film presents these as equally real and powerful, creating a dualistic cosmology where sacred and profane rituals battle for control of reality. Point 10. Identity and possession. Loss of self. When possessed, Arn loses himself. He's no longer in control of his body or actions. This raises profound questions about identity. If someone else controls your body, are you still you? If you commit acts while possessed, do they define you? The film suggests that identity is tied to conscious will, not just physical actions. Arn is not a murderer because his will was not involved in the murder. Reclamation. After possession ends, victims must reclaim their identity and sense of self. Arn must come to terms with what happened while the demon controlled him. David must recover from being violated at the deepest possible level. The film doesn't fully explore this psychological journey, but it acknowledges it exists. Thematic synthesize a worldview. Ultimately, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, presents a specific worldview. The universe is engaged in spiritual warfare. Humans are caught in the middle. Faith and love are our greatest weapons. Evil is real and powerful but ultimately defeatable, and institutions often fail to address spiritual realities. This worldview is deeply Christian, specifically Catholic, and reflects the beliefs of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Relevance. These themes remain relevant because they address perennial human concerns. How do we understand evil? What are we willing to sacrifice for love? How do we maintain faith when faced with inexplicable suffering? When do we trust institutions versus our own experience? The film uses supernatural horror to explore these profound questions. The historical case of Arn Johnson serves as a perfect vehicle for these themes because it was a real-life collision of faith, skepticism, love, sacrifice, and justice all played out in a public forum. Whether one believes the supernatural claims or not, the case forces us to confront difficult questions about belief, responsibility, and the limits of human understanding.